This is FE Peer Review. The date is December the 24th, 2021. Corey Kell's 45-degree sector test critical analysis, part 2, geometric flaws in Kell's model. This is part 2, and it's been a bit difficult to put together. Taken me some time. I've actually had to make a couple of versions of this, which I discarded. The reason primarily being that Kell never properly, systematically presents his test in the video speech that he makes in a simple, straightforward manner where you can determine exactly what steps you're supposed to take and what measurements you're supposed to take, what you're actually measuring, and how these measurements actually debunk the globe model as he claims they do. So I have had to try to piece together what I believe his test actually is. I'm doing the best I can. I'm going to use a few clips from his speech. Corey Kell's presentation is quite long and contains a lot of irrelevant material, so I'm only extracting a few bits of it that are relevant to the critique I'm making. I don't want to be accused of cherry picking or quoting things out of context, so I am including a link to his entire presentation in the description, and I encourage anybody who might have that concern to go and watch his entire presentation before levying that complaint against what I'm doing here today. Thank you. Let's watch this little bit here, and please do pardon me if the sound quality is not very good. Unfortunately, the original video's sound quality is quite poor as well.
And one thing I want you to remember, and that is the sun is always 90 degrees to a person, place, or thing every second of every minute of every day of every year within the prime meridian zone. Once you fully understand that, that is the end of heliocentrism.
Let's listen to that one more time, and in particular pay note to his use of the phrase prime meridian zone, and also 90 degrees to a person, place, or thing.
And one thing I want you to remember, and that is the sun is always 90 degrees to a person, place, or thing every second of every minute of every day of every year within the prime meridian zone.
Okay, so two problems there that I think underlie why his entire test is faulty. And it comes down to having a complete misunderstanding of what the heliocentric model is, which makes it impossible for him to design a test that's meaningful. First of all, what is the prime meridian zone? If it was a slip of the tongue, it was an egregious one. The prime meridian is the longitude line that runs through Greenwich, England. It's the vertical line in the image below. I don't know what Kell thinks the prime meridian zone actually is, but what he described very poorly is the zone between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, a zone bounded by latitudes, not longitudes. There are many places along the prime meridian where the sun is never overhead, and by that I mean at the zenith, at any day or time of year. The only places along the meridian where it will be are between the tropics. So when he says 90 degrees to a person, place, or thing, I'm assuming he's referring to it being at the zenith. That's part of the problem here, is he doesn't explain what this 90-degree angle is he's referring to. On an image he draws later, in a further slide, he might be referring to due south as 90 degrees. It's really hard to tell what the 90 degrees measurement is. If you're measuring between two things, and he's not telling you what the two things are. So I'm going on the basis that he means by 90 degrees at the zenith. If that's the case, the prime meridian zone is a meaningless phrase. Well, it's a meaningless phrase regardless. There is no such thing as a prime meridian zone. There's a prime meridian. The only zone in which the sun is at the zenith is between the tropics, which has got nothing to do with the prime meridian. So these are some fundamental misconceptions inside his view of what the heliocentric model is, and they come out right at the start here. This slide here explains the name for the 45-degree sector test. And what the 45 degrees refers to is that this image here, this circle, represents the Earth seen from the top down, looking at the North Pole. The vertical line here might be considered, for example, solar noon. And over the course of 3 hours, that line will rotate 45 degrees to this position of 10:30 on the clock. The line that's over going towards the upper right will rotate into the solar noon position. So that's the 45-degree sector he's referring to, and he refers to a 3-hour period, 3 hours, 45 degrees. What he's saying to do in his test is it can either be one person doing the same observation 3 hours apart, or two people located at a three-hour position. So a person at 9 o'clock and a person at noon, or a person at noon and a person at 3. His idea, and we'll see this in the next slide. In this slide, it appears that he's got the person at the solar noon position measuring a sun angle facing due south. I'm going to take it this 90 degrees, and this little protractor symbol that he's using indicates that this person is taking a sun angle measurement, measuring the altitude of the sun while facing due south. That's an altitude angle. And then after 3 hours have passed, the person would be over in this position, and the sun, with its rays that are coming in parallel, would be at a 45-degree azimuth to them. They then take a sun angle altitude measurement, and if their altitude measurement is more than 45 degrees, his claim is that the 45-degree azimuth angle added to the more than 45-degree altitude angle exceeds 90 degrees, and this somehow debunks the heliocentric model. I think that's what he's claiming here. This is the basic premise of the test he outlines. The test is intended to identify those times of day and year when, as he claims, the sun angles as observed cannot be reconciled with globe Earth geometry. A couple of points, broader points, I'd like to quickly make here before going into an analysis of the geometry. By proposing a test of the type he defines, he accepts the notion that a model can be invalidated if it does not match physical observations. This implies that, on the other hand, a model can be at least supported, if not 100% validated, if it matches physical observations. He proposes an observation of the sun which he claims will invalidate the globe model and validate a flat model. In that case, he implicitly accepts that we can determine the shape of the Earth by looking at the sky. It is important to note this, since there have been some flat Earth proponents who have said we cannot determine the shape of the Earth by looking at the sky. He defines a test based on a false globe model by misrepresenting the spherical geometry of the standard globe model by failing to include the axial tilt of Earth's rotation. He then demonstrates that this false model does not match physical observations. Claiming to have invalidated the globe model because of his false model results not matching physical observations, he does not go on to test a flat Earth model, but simply assumes it is valid because a globe model has supposedly been invalidated. He presents no flat Earth model which can be tested, nor does he attempt to derive a flat Earth model from physical observations. I'll interject here. You can kind of piece together what he thinks a flat Earth model might be. He does show the stereotypical pizza with the sun making circles over it at one point. And he does refer to the sun probably being local, 3,000 miles away, although he also says he thinks it might be a projection. Maybe it's a projection that's 3,000 miles away. On the third hand, he indicates parallel sun rays on his diagrams, which contradicts the concept of a local sun. So what is his flat Earth model? I'm not even sure he knows. Were he to present a flat Earth model, he would be making a claim which could itself be tested and perhaps invalidated. I believe, I am attributing motivation to him here, I believe he does not want to risk that. Were he to do the latter, try to derive a model from physical observations, he would definitely have to face that the physical observations do not lend themselves to a flat plane solution. I don't think he wants to risk that either. So just a very quick recap of his basic argument. He's saying that if you measure 3 hours before noon or 3 hours after noon, he's calling that his sun survey time. And if you get what seems to be from this image here, indicating an altitude angle for the sun of 45 degrees or less, he says that the Earth's surface could either be curved or flat. On the other hand, if you get an altitude angle for the sun that's more than 45 degrees, he says 46 degrees and above, then the Earth's surface is flat. So we're back in the model now. Now I've made an entire video about how I created this model. So if you have questions about that, I encourage you to go check out that video. There will be a link in the description. Essentially, the two important geometric components are the orbital plane of the Earth around the Sun and the tilt of the Earth's axis relative to that orbital plane. These two crossing black lines suggest the orbital plane. So what we would have is the Sun in the middle, and then the Earth in its positions during the 4 seasons around that. I've paused here for a moment and I've expanded the view area so you can take in the right-hand part of the Sketchup work area. I wanted to point out that certain elements of this model are to scale and one element is not. I did not put the sun in the model. The sun would be at this intersection here. Where I had to have put it into scale, the spheres would have been so far apart from each other that it would have been difficult to navigate around the model. We don't need the sun in there. We don't need the distance from the Earth to the sun to be modeled to scale. All we need is the correct angular relationships. So the spheres are tilted at the correct angle relative to the orbital plane. And these crossing black lines give us the path of the sun rays as they reach the Earth at each of the 4 seasons. So if we take the northern hemisphere summer example here, sunlight is arriving parallel to that black line. Ditto for spring and winter. So Kell's main argument is that if a path of sunlight reaches a station point at the 3 o'clock or the 9 o'clock position, at an altitude of greater than 45 degrees, we are dealing with a flat plane because he says that that's geometrically impossible on a sphere. As I've said already, his mistake is that he does not take into account the tilt of the Earth's axis relative to the orbital plane. Because he does not take into account the 23.43 degree tilt, that his test is completely flawed. So let's find an example that shows that a greater than 45 degree angle is compatible with the heliocentric model. We're looking at summer for the northern hemisphere. We've got our path of a sun ray. We've got the 40 degree latitude observer, and that sun ray is striking the observer at his station point there at 40 north latitude. You can see this dashed guideline passes through that observer point. And what I've done in order to make it easier to see and measure the angle of that path of sunlight is I've drawn a little triangle in here. I'm going to maneuver our position a little bit so you can see that this line is the observer, is the zenith line at the observer's station point. So that would be looking straight down on the head of the observer. The line, the crossed face here is due south for the observer. So the observer standing at the crossing looking towards the X would be looking due south. The sun at 9 a.m. is off to the observer's east, slightly south of east. That would be the azimuth. And then the altitude is simply the vertical angle measured from the horizontal of the observer's location to the sun. We'll now measure that angle. And if you look in the bottom right corner of the screen, it says measurements. The angle that is there will show up in that little box in the bottom right corner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that horizontal line and I'm going to rotate it so that it aligns with the path of the sunlight. And if you look in the bottom corner, it says angle approximately 48.8 degrees. That's more than 45 degrees. Basically, that's it. That single example demolishes Kell's flawed geometric model that failed fully take into account the full three-dimensional complexity of the heliocentric model. Not terribly complex. Nonetheless, he managed to miss a key component of it. So there you go. That one example, that one location, is what this whole video is all about. What I'm going to do, though, since we've got all of this stuff, I'm going to get the altitude and the azimuth for each of the station points, for each of the seasons, and we will compile that in a table and compare that to the results on timeanddate.com. And then Mr. Kells or anybody from Globebusters or anyone else who thinks that there's anything wrong with this model, they can take a look at it and they can compare it to timeanddate.com, and they will see that it's a good match. Now, I'm happy to share this SketchUp model with you, Mr. Kells. My email address can be obtained through my channel, my YouTube channel. It's SketchUp. You may or may not have a copy of the program, but it's a pretty common program, so you probably know someone who does. You can check all the angles in it yourself. You can verify that it is indeed a reasonably good representation of the heliocentric model. And once you've done all that, you will find that I'm correct. It's pretty straightforward, really. I'm right, you're wrong. Excuse me for being so direct, but I don't see any reason for beating around the bush. I'd like to mention just one other thing before I move on to that last stage. This entire exercise here, this whole thing could have been done using geometry and trigonometry, pure numbers, no graphics of any kind, and the same results would have been obtained. I chose to use a graphic approach. I often do in these videos because I find it easier to grasp the concepts when I'm receiving them visually, and I think other people, quite a few people, are like myself in that respect. So this whole approach here is fundamentally geometric, does not involve calculation. That said, the result that I obtained is very simply just a matter of relationships between angles. So anybody that's handy with geometry, with trigonometry, could have achieved the same result using a pocket calculator. Now I'm bringing that up because I want to play one last little bit of our friend Corey Kell here. One little thing he says in his speech.
The observer is angled or oriented to the sun at 3 hours. So in the globe model, the observer is oriented 45 degrees. Now I know some heliocentrics say, well, you know, it's not a perfect sphere. Well, guess what? If it ain't, that's the best case scenario. Because if it's not a perfect sphere, you're in bigger trouble. Because your angle is only going to increase. How you figure that? Geometry, dude. You ought to try it.
Okay, I find it first very insulting the way he presents people who hold a different opinion than him throughout his entire speech. He tries to make them look like they're stupid. That thing with, how do you figure that? And second of all, he says, geometry, dude, you ought to try it. Well, Mr. Kell, we just tried it, but we tried it in a three-dimensional context because we live in a three-dimensional world. Your geometry is two-dimensional, and consequently, you overlooked something absolutely critical to the problem. Now, I'm quite convinced this is not representative of the kind of training that you received from the U.S. military, and that you are in no way representative of the kind of competence we can expect from people who have spent quite a few years in our military. So I think that it would behoove you to take a big step back, look through all of this again, start thinking about the problem in 3 dimensions, get informed on what the heliocentric model actually is, and then redo your entire presentation, taking all your mistakes and fixing them, being accountable. That's a word that you like to use. You used it several times throughout your speech. Accountability. Yep, you're accountable for the false information you put out there. Mistaken information. I don't know if you did this by accident or on purpose. Either way, you're doing harm with it. So be accountable for your mistakes, fix them, and go back to those people that paid you to make this appearance and tell them, I made a mistake. I made a fundamental mistake. It's perfectly consistent to have a greater than 45-degree angle on a globe Earth. So consequently, this test of mine in no way refutes the possibility of a globe Earth. And then if you receive some kind of speaker's fee for this performance, you really might want to consider either refunding it to the people that hired you in the first place, or maybe even better, donating it to a worthwhile nonprofit charity. I would recommend something like supporting science education for young people so that the next generation has a better grasp of the world we live in. You know, you're a military man. You spent your life studying what it means to survive in a harsh environment. Essential to that is understanding the environment you find yourself in. That is just absolutely fundamental. You know, if there's any reason why humanity has flourished, why Homo sapien has become the dominant animal on the planet, it's because we have been able to understand the forces at work in our environment and manipulate them to our advantage. It's because of our understanding of reality that we have survived. I mean, we've got no claws, we've got no fangs, we've got thin skin, we sunburn easily, but here we are, dominating the planet because we understand what's going on and how to turn it to our advantage. So get educated, find out what the heliocentric model really is, and while you're at it, donate your speaker's fee to a worthwhile educational charity that's science-based. That's my suggestion to you, Mr. Kell. Now we will move on and I'll compile the rest of the data and we'll compare that to time and date, and I'll give a quick summary of that material before I end this video. So I have gone through the model and I have filled in all of the relevant data regarding sun angles, altitude, and azimuth from the model, and I put them all in this little table here I made in Excel. Got our North Pole, 50 latitude north, 40 north, equator, 30 south, and the South Pole. So now I am looking at timeanddate.com, and I will look at a location at 50 north latitude. I found a little village in Cornwall that's called Cougar that happens to be at 50 north latitude. So I've entered that, there's the name, entered that as our location. And we're going to compare this time and date data to the table. So here's June 21st, 2022. That'll be next summer's solstice. And solar noon is at 1321. Looking at the right side here, we see the data as I move the cursor along the curve there. There's one heading 180 south, it's solar noon, and altitude is 63 degrees. And if we go back 3 hours to 1022, we get an altitude of 46. And if we go forward to 1522, it would be 1622. We get also an altitude of 46. So that was 63, 46, and 46. We put those in our spreadsheet here, 46, 46, and 63. Oh yes, and then the azimuth angles, well, they were on the screen there as well. So you can go back and look at that if you want to check them. I'll also do our 40 north latitude site on screen here, and then I'll just fill in the rest off screen. Okay, so I've changed the location now, and now we're looking at Philadelphia, which is at 40 north latitude. And we're looking at June 2022, and there's the 21st of June. So solar noon is at 1302. 1302, and that gives us, it's fussy, well, that's close enough, 73 degrees, 1302, so 1002, 49 degrees, 73, and 49. So we have altitude, 40 north latitude, 49, 73, and 49. And that compares to what we measured in the model of 48.8, so within a fraction of a degree. 73.4, again, these match. It's all a good match. I forgot to check the azimuth angles. Well, it's 1302, azimuth is 260 west, and 1002. Okay, I've expanded the window just a little bit. We're going to take a look here because I actually found I made a small mistake at one point, and we're going to fix that. So we're looking at Philadelphia on June 21st, 2022, and we got the altitude angles. Now we're going to look at the azimuth angles. The angle in the morning, 1002, 1003, 1003, 100 east, and then we have 180 at noon, and 1602, 260 west, so 100, 180, and 260. And so we'll put that in the spreadsheet here. Azimuth, 100, 180, and 260. And the 260 matches up, the 180 matches up, but I made a mistake here apparently. I had measured 80 degrees and time and date gives us 100. So I've gone in and looked at the Sketchup model, and I see right away this is the 40 north latitude summer position. See right away that I must simply have entered the wrong number in the Excel spreadsheet because it looks more than 90 degrees. That's north, that's east, so this angle is more than 90, and time and date tells us 100. So I must have simply typed the wrong number in. Yeah, it says down in the bottom right corner, angle 99.8. So I'll put that in where it should have gone, right there, 99.8, and that brings us to a match with time and date. So the two observations that we did from the model, and then we checked those on time and date, and that did all of that on screen. So all of this other stuff that I filled in off screen, I'm going to do the same with time and date, get the time and date data for all those other positions. You don't need to watch me do every single one. And then that'll wrap it up. Be back in a few minutes. I just wanted to mention trying to put in the South Pole data here that timeanddate.com does not actually allow me to put a pin at the South Pole. To locate at the South Pole as close as I can get is 5 degrees. The map just doesn't extend down all the way. So the data I've got is not for the South Pole, but for 5 degrees off the South Pole. And it's fun to look at. This is September 2022. You can see that because we're 5 degrees away from the pole, the altitude at noon is 5 degrees. And then we drop it. I've got the rest of the data in the spreadsheet. Let's take a look also at June, so you can see what it shows for. That's what time and date looks like. Down all day in June. No sunlight. And let's go to December. Up all day. So there you go. Well, this wraps it up. There's really no need to go any further with this at this point. The video is about 30 minutes long, and I think it adequately covers the problems that Corey Kell created for himself with his 45-degree sector test. I suggest Mr. Kell go back and review this material carefully. I'm leaving this Excel table on the screen here, so anybody wants to, they can pause the video and they can see all the numbers that are on it. Mr. Kell, I suggest you do that. I suggest that you do your observations. If you can get to a 40 or 50 north latitude location, if you're in the United States, that would be worthwhile effort. And then once you've done all that, as I said earlier, I think you're going to need to come back to this issue publicly and address publicly what you put out there earlier publicly as information. Anyhow, most important thing, remember folks, click that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. I love to see your comments. They're always the best part of this whole process. And I'll just repeat once more, Mr. Kell, if you want to get in touch with me, fepeerreview@gmail.com. I'll be happy to share. I can share with you both this Excel table and my SketchUp model. Not a problem whatsoever. Anybody else that's interested, just drop me a note. I'm a little bit lazy about getting into my email and responding sometimes, so give me time if I don't answer within a few days. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and I wish you all a Happy New Year.